Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Thursday, September 1st, 2016. Happy birthday to Nancy Walton in Missoula, Montana. I think we have a schizophrenic candidate and a schizophrenic campaign revealed before our eyes in one 24-hour period. And, of course, I'm referring to the Trump Circus. Because he staged this photo op with the president of Mexico, whose name, Peña Nieto, he doesn't seem to be able to pronounce, even though he calls him a friend and says they had an excellent meeting. And we learn that that photo op, to show off some some restraint, some decorum, some adult behavior, was set up by his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who is married to Ivanka Trump. That is one side of this Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde combination. And then on the creepy side, Donald Trump had some major transition or transformation as he flew in his aging personal jet from Mexico City to Phoenix, where he gave a teleprompter speech before a rally of rabid, jingoistic, nativist American assholes. And pardon my language, but that's the best way I can think of describing the crowd that I saw as he gave this bizarre speech on television. Now, we've learned that this speech was written by Steve Bannon, Mr. Alt-Right, who just joined the campaign, came over from the Breitbart media swamp. And this schizophrenia was on full display. Because in Mexico City, Donald Trump was well-behaved. He claims he didn't talk about who would pay for the wall, but Peña Nieto says, oh, we talked about that, and I told him no way. And then he went back into full-on fearmonger bully mode when he got to Phoenix. And it was a bizarre speech, pandering to the crowd, as he loves to do, and he did appear to add some verbiage, some impromptu commentary to his scripted remarks. But I really feel whiplash, because it's not that I expected Donald Trump to make this kind of mid-course correction and say, oh, I was wrong about deporting 11 million people, and, I'm learning my way here. No, he's too smug and too arrogant for anything like that. But the mixed messages that have been sent since Bannon and Kellyanne Conway joined his campaign and Paul Manafort was banished, it's really hard to figure out what he really means and what would happen if Trump is elected president. As part of the speech, he said, Mexico will pay for the wall, believe me, 100%. They don't know it yet, but they'll pay for the wall. They're great people and great leaders, but they will pay for the wall. Now, first of all, as I pointed out yesterday, the wall is a monument to a myth. And the myth is that our most serious immigration problems are at our southern border. And by targeting Mexico as the central focus of illegal immigration, there is a clear racist message that I pick up. And last night on the PBS NewsHour, they had a pretty good report. They sent a reporter who went across the southern border, stopping in California, in Arizona, in Texas, and pointed up the ludicrousness of this idea. And even people who live right on the border. One woman rents a house that used to have a tunnel in it that was tunneled in from the other side of the border. And she said, the wall won't do any good. And there is a fence already erected along large portions. And we have drones and we have sensors and we have more Border Patrol people than we ever had. Trump, of course, wants to increase that by 5,000. It's an arbitrary number that he picked out of his hair. And the central point of his speech was to pander to disaffected white Americans with this message of imminent crisis. He said, we're in the middle of a jobs crisis, a border crisis, a terrorism crisis. This election is our last chance to secure the border, stop illegal immigration, and reform our laws to make your life better. Now, banishing undocumented dishwashers, gardeners, and domestics, and many of them who have jobs that are out there that do compete with Americans, it's not going to put Americans back to work in significant numbers. And so in pandering to and pursuing these myths, Trump is squarely cementing his candidacy on his ability to scare the living daylights out of Americans who've lost out in recent years and are looking for someone to blame, preferably someone whose skin has a different pigment than their own. So what are the actual proposals that Trump made? Well, he said he had a 10-point plan. But when you try to extract out the BS, the hype, and his constant repetition, there isn't much of a plan there. But he said that he'll build the wall, Mexico will pay for it, there will be no amnesty, and he really focused on making it seem like every one of us needs to be afraid that crouching behind that bush over there is an illegal immigrant who wants to kill me. And he falsely claimed that there are 2 million criminal aliens inside the United States. Now, the average deported over the last few years is under 200,000 per year. And nobody knows where he got this scary number of 2 million people. But even with that exaggeration, he went overboard in trotting out the survivors of people who've been killed in a few criminal incidents that involved non-citizens. And he made it seem like, if we had just deported those people, that no crimes would ever happen. And, of course, that is a racist summation. That's an inference that comes from the mind of somebody who fears a person who speaks a different language or comes from a different nation. So he claims that on day one, if you're a criminal and you're not a citizen, you're out of here. Now, he doesn't say how he's going to do it. Maybe he'll start a new Trump Airlines to fly people home. He also said he wouldn't just take you down on the other side of the border and let you go. He's going to take you far, far away to where you came from. Now, a lot of this appeals to the small minds of people with limited information, limited experience with actual immigrants, and a streak of racism in their persons. And so while he talked a really hard line, he demonized sanctuary cities like San Francisco. And he repeatedly said, really, just that he will decree that things will be different, and therefore they will. He never talks about process. He never talks about Congress. He never talks about cost, except when he says Mexico will pay for it, but he still doesn't estimate how much it would cost. And so the New York Times had a pretty good editorial today entitled Donald Trump's Deportation Nation. A couple of lifts here. In a strident speech given over a steady roar of cheers, he restated his brutally simple message. Criminal aliens are roaming the streets by the millions, killing Americans and stealing our jobs, and he'd kick them all out with a new deportation force. He'd build the wall and make America safe again. The speech was a reverie of immigrant-fearing police-state bluster, with Trump gushing about building an impenetrable, physical, tall, powerful, beautiful southern border wall, assailing media elites and listing his various notions for thwarting evil foreigners. And he even joked that the immigration force might deport Hillary Clinton. A little bit later, the Times says, while Trump's plans for a lockdown deportation nation are largely a nativist fantasy, immigrant communities in Arizona have lived with the reality of what the Trump vision leads to, the brutal racial profiling and policing abuses of Sheriff Joe Arpaio, a staunch Trump ally who is up for re-election in November. And they close by saying Arizona was a fitting backdrop to Trump's hollow proposals and his relentless lies about the dangers that immigrants pose to the lives of our American citizens. And the final statement here is tornadoes are hollow at the center, too, and they do a lot of damage. And I lifted just a few verbatim quotes from Trump's speech, and he attacked Obama and Clinton. Now, Hillary Clinton has not been in any office for the last almost 4 years. And, of course, politically, he loves to lump her together with Obama. And just last week, he was acknowledging how many millions of people Obama has deported while he was president. But not in Phoenix. No, it was only attacks. Clinton and Obama, he says, support the release of dangerous, he said it 3 times, criminals from detention. And they support unconstitutional executive amnesty. He hammers Hillary Clinton, saying that she promises uncontrolled, low-skilled immigration that continues to reduce jobs and wages for American workers, and especially for African-American and Hispanic workers within our country. Most incredibly, he continued, because to me this is unbelievable, we have no idea where these people are, where they come from. I always say Trojan horse. Watch what's going to happen, folks. It's not going to be pretty. And then he plays the Syrian card, the Muslim card, saying that Hillary wants to bring in 620,000 new refugees from Syria over a short period of time. And so fear is the currency of this campaign. I've said that before. But it's palpable in Trump's bizarre behavior both in Mexico City and in Phoenix yesterday. And, you know, I haven't even seen attempts to fact-check the obvious lies in this speech. Maybe, you know, somebody's done it and I just didn't see it in my news scan today. But there's a lot to fact-check there, that's for sure. Now, one of his other recent statements was that he was going to require a loyalty oath of Muslims coming into the United States. And he compared it back to the Cold War, and, you know, we did that to keep communists, to screen them out. And, of course, it's a fantasy. Because if I want to come to the United States and I have some kind of dark intentions, I don't care about filling out some form where I pledge allegiance to the United States or say that I'm renouncing Sharia law or something like that. And so the idea that you can control people's thinking and that you can get them to conform is central to Donald Trump's worldview. And it's a crock. And he didn't cite Colin Kaepernick, the second-string quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers, who got a lot of publicity in the past week because he refused to stand for the national anthem before an exhibition game. But he appeared to be addressing that concern when he told the American Legion Convention in my birth town of Cincinnati today, we'll stop apologizing for America, we'll start celebrating America, and he's going to consult with military veterans groups to promote pride and patriotism in schools, teaching respect for the U.S. flag and Pledge of Allegiance. That flag deserves respect, and I will work with American Legion to help to strengthen respect for our flag. You see what's happening. It's very, very sad. And by the way, we want young Americans to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. One country under one Constitution, saluting one American flag, always saluting, he said. And this crosses the line of just expressions of patriotism to a scary form of nativist nationalism. And, you know, the image of brown shirts comes to mind pretty quickly. One other quote from Trump in Cincy today, we will be united by our common culture, values, and principles, becoming one American nation. He forgot to insert the word white there. A new poll, and I am instructed to credit Morning Consult for this. They sent it to me yesterday, but said I couldn't release it until 6 a.m. Eastern today. Whew. Glad I got through that. Anyway, it's pretty interesting. A majority of voters, 52%, say that Gary Johnson should be included in the 3 presidential debates put on by the Corporate Debate Commission. 58% of independents said Johnson should be included, 49% of Democrats and 48% of Republicans. Jill Stein fares almost as well. She gets support from 47% of all voters saying that she should be included in the debate, and 47% of Democrats, 42% of Republicans say she should be on the debate stage. I point this out not because I think that the rules are going to change and the third-party candidates will be invited. I wish they would. They should be. But it's baked in the DNA of the Presidential Debate Commission that it is set up for the purpose of excluding these pesky minor party people. But I bring it up to point out the discontent in the nation, that Democrats and Republicans want to hear from other candidates. They want other ideas. And that is, along with the fear component, I think the defining elements of this campaign in this bizarre year of 2016. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. In the last 24 hours, Casey Condon booked $10. So did Julie Dupree. Andy Krieger and Bill Goodacre, they're longtime monthly subscribers. Thanks to each and every one of you. And you may know how to do it, you may not. You want to become a subscriber? It's easy. And I only want you to subscribe if you've got extra cash. If you're living on a fixed income, you continue to listen guilt-free. I have no problem. But if you're in a position to help, go ahead. Come over to peterbcollins.com. There's a menu icon. Click on that. Pull down, become a subscriber, takes you to the sign-up page, and in a couple of minutes with a PayPal account and your credit card, you're all good to go. And if you don't like PayPal, we can work with you. Don't worry about that. You can mail in a check or a money order. We do take cash, too. There's a P.O. Box address on the sign-up page. And also the bonus books for new annual subscribers with a mailing address in the continental U.S., Yes, and Janet in New York, I got to the post office yesterday. Your book is finally on its way to you. I mentioned yesterday that President Obama parachuted into Lake Tahoe for the annual Tahoe Summit, and he brought $30 million with him in federal support to try to keep Lake Tahoe pristine. Now, the water there is warming like many bodies across the globe, and the purity of the water, the clarity, has declined measurably over the last few years. And so he got Department of Interior to kick in almost $30 million to remove dead trees. The EPA has some grants for reducing stormwater runoff, and he also is kicking in $1 million from the Department of Fish and Wildlife to prevent the spread of the invasive zebra and quagga mussels. Thank you, President Obama. And then he flew to Hawaii, where Air Force One had to dodge not one but 2 hurricanes hanging out across the Pacific Ocean. And when he got there, he gave a speech about climate change. And he promised after he leaves the White House that he will push to build on the record that he has achieved and that's also reflected in the Paris Accord that was signed a year ago. And just last week, Obama created the world's largest marine reserve by quadrupling in size, the biodiverse national monument. Let me try this out here. Papahanaumokuakea. I'm not going to do it again, but I'm glad to see that. In an interesting move, the president of Georgetown University, which is a Jesuit institution in Washington, D.C., acknowledged that over 200 years ago, or almost 200 years ago, the university profited from the sale of 272 slaves. And it took them this long to come to terms with that. But John DeGioia, who is the university president, offers a formal apology today. He's going to create an institute for the study of slavery. erect a public memorial to the slaves, rename a couple of buildings on campus, and while they're not offering scholarships as part of this package, they're offering to treat the descendants of slaves similar to the families of alumni, the preferential treatment given to the children of graduates of a given institution. And a commission had offered a range of opportunities for Georgetown to address these ancient offenses. But this is the farthest anybody has gone. Brown University, Harvard, University of Virginia, they've all recognized their ties to slavery, but they have not gone so far as to offer preference in admission. I have long championed the cause of Mumia AbuJamal, a journalist and former Black Panther who was sentenced to death in Pennsylvania for the killing of a Philadelphia police officer way back in 1981. I believe that Mumia is innocent of that crime, and the courts reduced his punishment from the death penalty to life without parole a few years back. In the interim, he has come down with hepatitis C, along with thousands of other prisoners in the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. I think the total is 6,000. And the treatment is effective. There is a new drug, but it's very expensive. It's like $1,000 a pill, and you got to take one every day for 12 weeks. And so the department is saying, you're not sick enough for us to invest this amount of money to bring your health back. And what's really bizarre is a federal district court judge, Robert Mariani, denied Mumia AbuJamal access to this very expensive drug program because of a technicality, saying that, well, you didn't name the right people who are responsible for this in your request for an injunction. And then the same judge, in almost the same breath, found that the evidence and testimony presented in the case demonstrate that Pennsylvania's Hep C protocol for inmates fails to meet basic constitutional standards. And evidence shows that Pennsylvania treats only 5, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, out of more than 6,000 prisoners who are infected with hepatitis C, and that hundreds have been moved to the prison infirmaries where they are dying in isolation, often chained to their beds, according to activist Noel Hanrahan, who runs the Prison Radio nonprofit that supports Mumia. And so this is just another stunning injustice. And when you read this, that the judge said, well, you didn't name the right people. If you name the right people, I might be ruling in your favor. How arbitrary and how cruel. Senator Bob Graham continues to fight for the truth about 9/11. He gave a press conference at the National Press Club in Washington today, and I've been chasing the senator for 3 weeks trying to get an interview, but they don't return my calls. At any rate, Who, What, Why has the story, and I've linked to it in today's podcast. And Senator Graham continues to fight over the Saudi connection to the events of September 11th, 2001, and the 28 pages that he shamed the Obama administration into releasing. They're not fully redacted, but it's, you get the idea. It shows that they intentionally ignored the evidentiary leads that showed that Prince Bandar and his wife were sending money to these guys in California who just accidentally ran into a couple of the guys who were attending flight school and who later were named as suspected hijackers on 9/11. And so there's a whole lot to explore. And I applaud Senator Graham. I've interviewed him in the past and had to brush him back for being so damn polite and diplomatic. But in his own way, he is working hard to pull the threads to unravel the cover-up. He doesn't agree with the claims by the U.S. and Saudi governments that these documents don't mean anything and that all the leads had been pursued but didn't go anywhere. And Graham wants the government to publicly disclose the information that his investigators developed during the joint inquiry that he chaired of the intelligence committees back in 2002. So Bob Graham knows a whole lot about this that he can't talk about. And I would love just to see him get a special declassification process so that he can tell us what he knows. That would be fascinating. He also says that there are 80,000 pages of an FBI report that have been released to a judge but have not been made public, and he hopes that that will happen soon. And speaking of 9/11, I don't typically do things based on anniversaries of events, but this year marks 15 years since the calamities of September 11th, and the calamities continue in the form of perpetual war, expansive surveillance, a creeping police state, and the loss of many of our valued constitutional rights. And I am unabashed. I don't wear tinfoil hats. I don't claim that I know it was an inside job, but I know there was a cover-up. And so I am, over the next week, interviewing as many people as I can who I find credible critics of the official narrative of 9/11. And I'll have that powerful podcast for you on or about September 11th of 2016. Hey, Tim Cook says he might bring some cash home next year. Apple Computer, and this stuns me because the last I had heard, the amount of cash that Apple is stashing offshore was about $180 billion, but the latest estimate is $214 billion. And Tim Cook has threatened that he would only bring those profits home if they give him a tax holiday. And he falsely claims that he'd have to pay 40% to bring the money home. The top federal corporate tax rate is 35%, and nobody pays it. But Cook says that next year, he doesn't specify an amount, but in the billions he expects he will be repatriating profits. And I don't know if this is just spin to try to distract from the European Union effort, or maybe he doesn't want to be like the EpiPen lady, vilified in social media. But this is something I just found in this report from The Guardian, and that is that every year in its annual report, Apple makes large provisions for U.S. taxes, which allows it to claim that it has an effective tax rate of 26%. However, behind these accounting provisions, Apple has made it clear it doesn't intend to repatriate funds and actually pay the taxes provisioned for, while the U.S. maintains its current rates. And for that reason, the group's reported tax rate is regarded by experts as accounting fiction. Yes, indeed. You know about this Romanian guy? His name is Marcel Lazar. He used the screen name Guccifer. He pled guilty to 2 counts. They had lodged 9 against him, and today he was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. And because he pled guilty, there's been no examination of the charges against him, no way of evaluating if he did, in fact, hack into Hillary Clinton's private email server. He says he did. And he was able to hack into George W. Bush's website and steal some of his paintings. What a lucky guy. But this is another frustrating example of how our spook community grabs a guy like this, and instead of giving him a fair trial and letting the public know what may or may not have happened, who did he hack, when and where and why? Nope, he goes to jail, and the case is closed, and we move forward with just some vague memory of who Guccifer was and what he may or may not have done. Now Harry Reid is jumping on the FBI saying, hey, I think Russia is trying to tamper with the elections this year. The outgoing Democratic leader in the Senate from Nevada is saying that since we've learned that Arizona and Illinois had their election websites hacked, that this is somehow information that confirms that Russia is involved. And I'm highly suspicious of that. Emails published by a hacker who called himself Guccifer 2.0, and this is unsourced, but it says here, believed to be an alias for Russian hackers linked to the intelligence services. We don't know that. And over at WikiLeaks, Julian Assange has tried to be very clear that Without telling us where the leaks came from, they probably came from inside the DNC, not from some Russian source. Now, in today's New York Times, a book-length story. It was 20 pages when I printed it out. It took more than 20 minutes to read it. Jo Becker, who I've interviewed before, she's a talented reporter, together with Stephen Erlanger and Eric Schmidt, have compiled a piece that I think is really trashy reporting, because it is based on a whole pile of unnamed, anonymous sources who are permitted to sully the reputation of Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. Now, I don't consider Julian Assange to be a saint, but I think WikiLeaks performs a valuable function. And to the extent that Assange has an ego that gets out of control and he considers himself to be WikiLeaks, I'm critical. But what this story purports to do is create evidence that WikiLeaks is in the pocket of the Russians. And the headline reads, "How Russia Often Benefits When Julian Assange Reveals the West's Secrets." Now, come on. Anytime any American or anybody else reveals some of our secrets, it's going to benefit the people who we were being secretive from. It goes without saying. And in this lengthy piece, they trot out, again, all based on anonymous sources here. For example, United States officials say they believe with a high degree of confidence that the Democratic Party material was hacked by the Russian government. No evidence is presented here whatsoever. Next page. Among United States officials, the emerging consensus is that Assange and WikiLeaks probably have no direct ties to Russian intelligence services. But they say that at least in the case of the Democrats' emails, Moscow knew it had a sympathetic outlet in WikiLeaks. Now, anybody can drop documents at WikiLeaks. And so this fingering of the Russian intelligence services without any evidence, without any proof, is pure speculation. And they build on that speculation by interviewing people who have been involved with Assange before. Some are named, some are not. And they build the case that over time, Assange has not fulfilled his promise to expose Russian perfidy as he has American. And when you document it, that's arguably true. But they even quote Assange as saying, well, you know, the Russian stuff is pretty boring. And that may or may not be a reasonable explanation to you. They also say that related to Syria, he's released documents that hurt the United States and favor Russia. And I invite you to read this piece and read it critically. And then I want you to read Kevin Gostola's takedown of it. I've linked to both in the show file for today's podcast. And Kevin is this talented young journalist at shadowproof.com. And he calls it yellow journalism. And I agree. He takes it apart by pointing out the way this is compiled. Former collaborators and supporters are granted anonymity to speak. One former collaborator tells the Times that Assange views everything through the prism of how he's treated. America and Hillary Clinton have caused him trouble, and Russia never has. Times editors would never greenlight this kind of story, says Gostola. It wouldn't sell newspapers. What sells is mashing quotes from transparency advocates who have qualms about how Assange runs WikiLeaks, with insinuations from anonymous officials to bolster the idea that Assange is unwittingly or wittingly serving Putin. WikiLeaks itself has refuted much of the Times report, claiming Russia never issued a visa for Assange that's claimed in the story. It points out Assange published an anthology of essays based on U.S. diplomatic cables, including one on Russia, which specifically examined corruption in the country. But I do take the point that, overall, WikiLeaks has embarrassed the United States more than it has embarrassed Russia. That doesn't mean that this is intentional or that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks are some sort of tool of the Russian government or Putin himself. A couple more quotes here from Gostola. Even more ridiculous is how the Times reporters appear to invent metrics to castigate the work of WikiLeaks. The report asserts Russia has been the most vocal opponent of the TPP, with Putin portraying them in an effort to give the United States an unfair leg up in the global economy. The Times reporters, notes Gastola, never include any context that would answer the question, compared to who or compared to what country? It's just a bald-faced assertion that basically is unsupported. He goes on to say the special report is a window into the state-identified mindset of the New York Times as a media institution. And he calls out Dean Baquet, the executive editor at the Times, who I've been critical of over the years. He has a record of avoiding journalism that could be upsetting to the U.S. government. Incredibly, Baquet has pointed to the publication of disclosures from WikiLeaks to argue the Times is willing to push back against the government. It now ham-handedly tries to link Assange to Putin, and one must ask, did publishing WikiLeaks disclosures ever unwittingly help Putin? And how will the Times atone for its sins of disloyalty? Thanks for a great analysis there, Kevin Gastola. And thank you for listening to my news and comment podcast today. This podcast is a free leisure service of Peter B. Collins' World Empire, and you're free to share it with absolutely everyone. I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling until then.